Good news for Lexus folks, because the Lexus RZ and by extension Toyota BZ, formerly 4X, are now relevant. This here Lexus RZ 450, for us, these Euro things say 500 on the back, is the new volume model, and Lexus has some pretty big aims for it. Now that they're finally going to roll this thing out across the rest of the country, they're looking to triple their sales of this electric crossover. So, how does it stack up? What actually makes it matter now? And how do we feel about it on the road? The Lexus RZ rolled out a few years back as Lexus's premium twin to the Toyota BZ 4X. That car, which shared its platform with Subaru as the Solterra, got off to something of a rocky start. They drove fine, they were quiet enough, they were by all accounts an appliance enough EV, but they were held back by some really big shortcomings. Chief among these? Well, the range was not very good, nor were the charge speeds. It was a slow vehicle to top up, and one that you would have to recharge more frequently than many Canadians would have liked. As a result, dealers had a hard time. Those things were stuck on lots for ages. Finally, though, they've revamped it, and as mid-cycle refreshes go, this is very substantial. These version 1.5 units use an unusually heavily revised version of the platform. There's more space underneath to fit more cells in, and then of course, those cells being of more modern and more developed chemistry, pack in greater energy density. That means that depending on which mainstream RZ model you get, you're looking at either 420 or up to 486 kilometers range. There's also a slightly more aggressive RZ 550 F Sport trim, and that does have a bit of a cost, some 366 kilometers, because it's using more of that juice to make you go fast. Really though, this here 450, this is the one that matters. And running standard all-wheel drive, this is the model that's good for 420 kilometers. The first question on everyone's mind then is, how does that stack up with the incumbent, the Ioniq 5? Well, those things span a pretty substantial range. Depending on whether you get the base 63 odd kilowatt hour battery or get the larger, which used to be 77 and is now 84, you're looking at figures down as low as 390 or as high as 450 to a claimed 570 kilometers in those top extended range versions of the Hyundai Ioniq 5. Here in Canada, for that peak range figure, you're looking at the base model, the 350. That comes with the same 77 odd kilowatt hour battery as you get in the rest of these vehicles, but it only runs front wheel drive. That's not something that we've had in Canada before, because Canadians with our winter have been sold on the idea that you absolutely need all-wheel drive, which frankly, you don't. A single motor still does the job, even in the snow, and when it's powering those front wheels, is very effective at clawing your way forward. Remember too that most of us who live within range of any electric infrastructure that could use something like this, well, those streets tend to be plowed pretty well. If you're going out past Timmins, that's a different story, but also, if you're going out past Timmins, you're probably looking at a Ram 2500. So, what have they changed here? Well, of course, there is that substantial revision to the chassis. With that, they've stiffened things significantly. They've increased welding at the seams to make sure that there's more torsional rigidity, and then to compensate that, to make sure that you don't have forces bringing vibrations and noise through the cabin, we have more substantial sound deadening, and in particular, underbody vibration absorption. Out on the road, that reflects in a relatively quiet, albeit honestly, fairly normal noise experience. This is quiet, it's an EV. You get some road noise from under the tires, and I've got to say, at high speeds, the noise insulation from wind is actually really well done. But otherwise, I wouldn't say this is anything exceptionally quiet. Quieter than the previous gen BZ4X, to be sure, but nothing wild. Fortunately, in most modern Lexuses, you can fill that silence with some pretty solid audio. These here RZs, well, like many of the others, can fit optional upgraded Mark Levinson branded audio systems. And just as in the others, it's pretty solid here. It doesn't have quite the same high-end range that you'll find in some of the top-end models like the LC500. But by all accounts, and with some of my trickier tracks, it actually does a pretty respectable job of rendering detail, helping you find those little extra bits that you might not normally hear through your AirPods or even at home. Also new for this generation is a significant expansion of the available trims. Most of the world gets 3 trims for this, and Canada previously only had 3. Now though, they've extended that out to 5. There's the base 350, but there are then 3 different variants within the 450 before you finally get to that 550 F Sport. Now, the 550 F Sport, to get it out of the way, is, as you're probably used to in Lexus crossovers now, largely an appearance-based package. You do get a bit more power unlocked here, and that's basically just that they've uncorked more using the computers. But otherwise, it looks more aggressive, it has a unique interior with some cool materials and contrasts, but otherwise, it's a vanity pack, and quite frankly, I'm not entirely sure why. You see, this here RZ, well, it's not something that you're buying necessarily for dynamic or spirited driving. Out here on these winding Portuguese roads, it is certainly more dynamic and engaging than expected. Part of that, of course, is because these BEVs generally have a very low center of gravity, thanks to all of that battery mass way down in the floor. But it's still quite a heavy vehicle, and, well, yes, it uses a McPherson front and double wishbones out back. You kind of need that to manage all of the weight that this is hauling about. Because of that 77 kilowatt hour battery, this is a heftier fella. Now, obviously, you're not usually driving mountain roads, you're just running about town, and so that doesn't matter a ton. Really, what ends up mattering is how it rides and how it carries that when you're just bumping along through rough Toronto streets. The suspension and damping in this are very forgiving in support of that then. The springs are quite soft, and if you really bury the brake, the nose will plunge quite significantly. But it's also really good at absorbing a lot of bumps. You've got some sidewall here. Standard wheels are 18-inch, or on the higher trims they go up to 20, which does take away some of your small bump absorption. But the overall smoothing of the ride is very effectively managed, and the damping here is just the right amount. I'm quite impressed across this at how they've managed to afford a very almost airy ride. This feels like it's on air suspension at times. It's never bouncy though, and it's not pillowy. It's planted, it's confident, but it's never jarring. This is very elegant and very refined, especially just for a regular crossover like that. Accompanying that out on the road, and especially on the highway, are the usual suite of driver assist that we've come to appreciate and really just expect from Toyota products. They pack a lot into these from standard, and one of the standouts is actually something that a lot of people may initially turn their nose at, but that's really rather nice. It is disableable, you can turn this off, but this uses a system that can detect vehicles ahead slowing, and if you're on the cruise control or just even driving normally, it will actually very gently decelerate the car. Never in a way though that feels like it's actually taking control from you, and you can still override it. It's just something that softens some of the elasticity when you're in traffic. Along with that, of course, is what you would expect: the adaptive cruise control, the lane keeping, and the gamut of warnings which beep and boop, hopefully which you can't hear beeping and booping at me out here as well. Bring that all home to charge, and we've got slight improvements to charging as well. Previously, these things ran just a 7 kilowatt internal charger. That meant that if you plugged into a wall-bound AC outlet, that was all you were gonna get. Now though, that's been bumped up to 11 kilowatts. If you have a level 2 charger in your garage that's set up, connected to, for instance, a dryer plug, that should be good for a 7-hour charge overnight. Lexus also says that if you take this to a public DC fast charger using the new NACS standard or Tesla style charger, that you can do the 10 to 80% run in about half an hour. Now, that is particularly noteworthy because they claim that this is not just in optimal conditions. It requires that you have preconditioned the battery, of course, which takes about half an hour of driving. Now, if you're out on the road, that should significantly improve the available infrastructure that Canadians are able to access, because of course we still have relatively limited DC all around the country. What's really interesting about that though is that their quoted fast charge time uses a very unique standard. They say half an hour for the 10 to 80% stretch, and that's pretty good. That's not the 18 minutes that you're gonna see out of the Hyundais, but it's also not running 800 volts like the Hyundais or the Kias. What's very curious though is that they've quoted that figure at -10 degrees Celsius. That means that you're not necessarily going to be looking at horrific charge times when our Canadian winters hit, but of course we are going to need to see that for ourselves when we finally test these things back home. As for when we will be testing these back at home, well, the questions continue because Lexus still hasn't quite decided on some of their final trim details and particularly the pricing around them. Given that stated goal of tripling their distribution in Canada, though, we have the impression that they are looking to stay somewhat competitive with these things. We expect pricing in or around the Hyundai Ioniq 5s. That is not quite as comfortable or luxurious as this model, but that sort of levels the playing field against the Hyundai's technological advantages on that eGIMP platform. A final detail to note is that Toyota is working on things here, but we aren't necessarily going to see them at home. Out here in Portugal, we've had the opportunity to drive a unit with Toyota's new steer-by-wire system. This is really cool, and though it hasn't yet been homologated for sale in North America, it is a sign of things to come. This is a system that Toyota has been working on for about a decade in anticipation of future applications for autonomous driving. And to build that out, they've gone very Toyota, which is to say, very cautious, very conservative. They've gone a little over the top, actually. They've built redundancies into every system there. So there is a full secondary computer running it, a full secondary steering feedback motor, a full secondary steering drive motor down below. All of them share the load at all times, but then if one part is found to be failing, then it will deactivate that and still just rely on the other until the vehicle is serviced. Also helping to power that in the case of power loss is a connection to the regular 12-volt lead acid battery that's in basically everything, in addition to the full EV battery. There's also an external connection so that emergency responders could plug in, or if you're even just having to get it towed. Using a yoke style wheel, it now has 20 degrees greater throw lock to lock, still only 200, so just over 90 degrees each way. But it also marries with a new shift-by-wire system. Kind of like the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, they've instituted artificial gear shifts if you so desire. So you can go through 8 speeds and flap little tiny paddles up at the top of the steering wheel. It isn't really something that I see anyone using all that much of. I appreciate the effort at trying to make it a slightly more engaging drive than we're used to from EVs, but the first gear cutoff is pretty jarring, and unfortunately the sound, while present, is not loud enough or intuitive enough to actually cue when you would want to shift for that first without looking all the way down at that digital cluster. Regardless though, you're still getting that same digital cluster that we've grown accustomed to, and that's not really all that great because, well, this central 14-inch display, which is standard across all models, is really sharp, really clean, and runs Toyota's very straightforward and enjoyable to use modern infotainment, the cluster still feels a generation behind. It's got large chunky pixels. It still has the same basic graphics style as they did 15 odd years ago. This is a dated system to look down at. They have tried to modernize that a little bit by using those Lexus-style capacitive and contextual steering wheel buttons, which will detect your finger touching something and then show on the head-up display if equipped or down in the cluster what that button would actually do right now. It's not really all that intuitive if you're not immediately used to it, but I guess it does the job. With all that then, and still not actually knowing how much these are going to cost in Canada, would I blindly take this over one of the competitors like the Hyundai Ioniq 5? Well, conceivably. You see, yes, that really rapid fast charging in the Ioniqs is really nice to have, and our testing has shown across all the different variants of it that they do actually meet those stated figures. Here in the RZ though, there is the assurance that Toyota has their goal that they've stated for years of keeping to 10% battery degradation per year. That combined with what is now reasonably adequate battery performance and particularly range in that mid-range model, those 420 kilometers, or especially the high range in that 486 from the front drive, well, that starts to make it a worthwhile consideration, even for those who perhaps have to go from Toronto to Montreal. Lexus and Toyota have finally done a very good job of making what was, frankly, a laughable punchline of an uncompetitive EV into something that is relevant, that's worthwhile, and that can be seriously considered in competition with its peers. For Driving.ca, I'm Al Alder. For more EV news, reviews, tests, specs, previews, and all the rest, be sure to follow us online.